The courthouse was packed that rainy Tuesday morning in Charleston, South Carolina. Lawyers shuffled papers nervously, reporters jostled for the best angle, and Judge Harrison McAllister prepared to settle a bitter dispute that had divided the town for months. Everyone expected a routine session, until the door at the back creaked open, and in limped a scruffy, muddy dog. The courtroom fell silent. The dog's coat was matted with dirt, and a faded leather collar hung loosely around his neck. His eyes, tired, yet somehow full of hope, met the judge's gaze. Suddenly, Judge McAllister froze. The collar was unmistakable. It was the same collar his late father had worn on the very dog he'd lost years ago. Whispers erupted like wildfire. The crowd's attention shifted instantly from legal papers to the unexpected visitor. The dog, seemingly aware of the attention, slowly made his way to the judge's bench and sat down, wagging his tail faintly. What happened next would change everything in that courtroom, and in the life of everyone present. Was this just a coincidence? Or a long-lost secret finally coming to light? Judge Harrison McAllister stared at the dog, his gavel frozen mid-air. Time seemed to stop. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows of the courtroom, but no one dared move or speak. The dog just sat there, head slightly tilted, eyes locked on the judge as if he were waiting, or remembering. "Your Honor," the bailiff whispered, breaking the silence. But Judge McAllister didn't respond. His eyes were glued to the collar, the frayed leather strap with the small, rusted tag that read, "Cooper." The name hit him like a punch to the chest. He stood up slowly, heart pounding, memories flooding back. Cooper had been his childhood dog, an old golden retriever his father gave him the year his mother died. The bond between them was unshakable. But Cooper had disappeared one stormy night 15 years ago and was never found. Everyone assumed he'd been hit by a car or stolen. Harrison had cried for days. Now, this dog, older, dirtier, limping, wore the same collar. The tag scratched, but unmistakable. The room was still in disbelief. The defense attorney glanced at the prosecutor. The stenographer had paused typing. Even the jury leaned forward in silence, eyes wide. "Where did you come from?" the judge muttered, stepping down from the bench. The dog wagged his tail once, stood up, and limped toward him. The closer he got, the clearer it became, this wasn't just some stray. His right ear had a small notch. Cooper's ear had been notched during surgery after a raccoon fight when Harrison was 11. The judge's voice cracked. "Cooper?" At the sound of his name, the dog gave a low, gentle bark. The courtroom gasped. Judge McAllister dropped to his knees, burying his face in the dog's fur, tears streaming freely. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside, something long buried had just come home. For nearly a full minute, no one moved. Judge McAllister stayed kneeling, his arms wrapped around the dog as if afraid he'd vanish again. The silence was no longer stunned, it was sacred. Even the court clerk wiped a tear discreetly. Finally, the judge stood, clearing his throat. His voice trembled. We'll take a recess." No one argued. The bailiff gently guided the stunned jury out. Lawyers gathered their papers, whispering behind hands. Harrison didn't hear any of it. His focus was on the dog, on Cooper. He led him into his chambers, a quiet space behind the courtroom filled with law books and faded portraits of judges past. He closed the door behind them and dropped into the leather chair, still trying to breathe steadily. The dog curled up at his feet like he belonged there, like he'd never left. Harrison reached down and ran his fingers over the collar again. The leather was cracked, but sturdy. The tag was still barely readable. Cooper had always hated baths but loved belly rubs. He would chase squirrels for hours but sleep next to Harrison's bed every night. But how? Harrison whispered. 15 years. He pulled out his phone, took a shaky photo, and called the one person who'd know what to do, his sister, Rebecca. When she answered, her voice was sleepy. "Harry? What's wrong? You're at court, aren't you?" "Becca," he said, voice breaking. "I found him. Cooper. I think he came back." There was a pause. Then a sharp inhale. "Harry, that's not funny." "I'm not joking," he said. He walked into my courtroom. Same collar. Same notch in the ear. Silence again. "I'm coming," she said. "Right now." As he hung up, Harrison looked down again. Cooper had fallen asleep. Peaceful. Safe. But questions burned in his mind. Where had Cooper been all this time? Who had taken care of him? And why, after all these years, had he come back now? Those answers were coming. He could feel it in his bones. By the time Rebecca arrived at the courthouse, the sky had cleared, but her heart was storming. She burst through the side entrance, hair in a messy bun, eyes wide with disbelief. Harrison met her at the door of his chambers. He didn't say a word, he just stepped aside. And there he was. Curled up on a rug beside the judge's old wooden desk, breathing softly, the dog looked like he belonged in that room. Rebecca took a slow step forward, then another. Her hands covered her mouth. "That's," she whispered. "It can't be." But then she saw the notch on his ear. The crooked toe on his back left paw. The same golden hue of his fur, just faded now, dulled by age and time. "Cooper," she choked. At the sound of her voice, his ears perked up. His tail thumped weakly on the hardwood floor. Rebecca dropped to her knees. "Oh my God! It is him!" She wrapped her arms around him and cried, just like her brother had. The room filled with the quiet weight of reunion. Not the kind that brings joy alone, but the kind born from deep loss, long years, and love that never really left. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Where has he been all this time?" "I don't know," Harrison replied, crouching beside her. "But someone had to have taken care of him. He's old, yeah, but he's not starving. He's tired, but not broken." Rebecca looked up. What if he was trying to find us this whole time? Before Harrison could answer, there was a knock at the chamber door. The bailiff peeked in. "Judge? I'm sorry, but there's a man in the lobby. Says he's looking for a dog. Matches this one exactly." Harrison and Rebecca exchanged a glance. Cooper stood up slowly. He was ready. The man waiting in the courthouse lobby was tall, thin, and wore a worn-out baseball cap pulled low over his brow. His denim jacket was faded and frayed, and his boots were caked with red South Carolina clay. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. When Harrison stepped into the room, Cooper followed close behind, tail down, ears back, not afraid, but cautious. The man's eyes widened the moment he saw the dog. "There you are," he whispered. Rebecca, standing just behind her brother, stepped forward. "Do you know this dog?" The man nodded slowly. "His name's Buddy. I've had him for over 10 years. His name is Cooper," Harrison said firmly. "He was our dog when we were kids. He disappeared 15 years ago." The man's expression didn't change. He crouched down, meeting the dog's eyes. "He came to me during a snowstorm in Tennessee. Half frozen. Barely alive. I took him in, fed him, cleaned him up. He stayed. I didn't know where he came from." "You never tried to find his owners?" Rebecca asked, her voice tight. "He didn't have a chip. No tags except for that collar, so worn I could barely read the name. I thought maybe he was abandoned. He never tried to run. He stayed by my side for everything." Harrison looked down at Cooper. "No, Buddy, no, Cooper. and felt a strange ache. What was the right name now? Who had the right to claim him? Why is he here now? Harrison asked quietly. Why Charleston? Why my courtroom? The man hesitated. He disappeared a week ago. I was camping outside Greenville. One morning he was just gone. Rebecca spoke gently. Maybe he was coming home. Cooper walked over to the man, sat down beside him, and looked up at Harrison. And in that quiet stare, something was clear: Cooper hadn't forgotten either life. But now he had returned to where he began. The three of them sat in quiet tension: Harrison, Rebecca, and the man named Eli Walker, who finally introduced himself as a traveling carpenter and former Army medic. His voice was low and honest, the kind that didn't need to convince anyone. He hadn't come looking for a fight. He'd come looking for his best friend. I didn't mean to take him from anyone, Eli said. But he saved me. More times than I can count. Rebecca glanced at Cooper, who now lay between the two men like a bridge holding two pasts together. Harrison sat down slowly. He was my lifeline once, too. After our mom died, Cooper was all I had. I lost him, and I never really stopped missing him. Eli nodded. Same here. I came back from the war with nightmares, tremors. Buddy, Cooper, he kept me grounded. He pulled me back from some dark places. The room was heavy with truth. Neither man could claim him without taking something from the other. Cooper looked up at them, eyes calm. Old. Wise. Rebecca finally spoke. Maybe he doesn't need to belong to one person now. Maybe he came back to give something. To finish something. Eli blinked. Like what? She shrugged gently. Closure. Healing. Maybe both. Cooper stood up, stretched slowly, and walked over to Eli. He nuzzled against the man's knee, then, without warning, turned, limped back to Harrison, and pressed his head into the judge's chest. Harrison's eyes welled again. He remembers everything, he whispered. Both lives. Eli gave a small, broken laugh. Guess we raised him right, both of us. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Like everyone understood that some moments didn't need solutions, they just needed space to breathe. But Cooper was tired. And what none of them knew was that he had come home not just to reunite, but to say goodbye. That night, Harrison didn't go home. He stayed in his chambers, curled on the old leather couch with a blanket draped over his shoulders. Cooper lay on a folded towel beside him, breathing slow and steady. Rebecca had gone to grab some dinner, and Eli had stepped out to make a few calls, promising to return in the morning. The courthouse was silent now, just the ticking of a wall clock and the occasional hum of passing cars outside on Broad Street. Harrison leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring at Cooper. You always knew when I needed you, he whispered. Even now. He reached down and gently stroked the fur behind Cooper's ear. The dog didn't move. He was warm, peaceful, but Harrison could feel it in the way his chest rose and fell. Cooper was tired. Not just from the journey. From life. You're saying goodbye, aren't you? He didn't expect an answer. But Cooper opened his eyes and looked up at him. That look, deep, quiet, knowing. It was the same look he'd seen 100 times when he was a boy. When he scraped his knee. When his father yelled. When he sat by the window waiting for his mother to come home from the hospital, even though she never would. Cooper had always been there. And somehow, 15 years later, he still was. Rebecca returned just after midnight with takeout bags in hand. She paused in the doorway when she saw her brother sitting on the floor next to the dog, silent tears running down his face. She sat beside him and handed him a coffee. You okay? No, he said. But I'm glad he came back. They ate quietly on the floor, the three of them, 2 humans and a dog who had lived 2 lives and somehow stitched them together in one final act of love. Cooper drifted to sleep again, breathing slower now. And for the first time in years, so did Harrison. Outside, the city lights flickered. Inside, a chapter was quietly closing. But Cooper had one more thing to give before he left. The morning light crept gently through the tall courthouse windows, casting golden streaks across the wooden floor. Harrison woke slowly, unsure for a moment where he was. Then he felt the soft warmth of fur beneath his hand. Cooper was still there. Breathing, but barely. Rebecca had fallen asleep on a chair nearby, legs curled beneath her, her coat acting as a pillow. Harrison sat up quietly, trying not to wake her, and looked down at the dog who had somehow woven himself back into their lives with perfect timing, and perhaps perfect purpose. Just then, Eli returned. He stepped inside slowly, holding a paper bag and a thermos. His eyes immediately scanned the room, landing on Cooper. "He didn't want to eat last night," Harrison said softly. "He's slowing down." Eli nodded, setting the bag on the table. "I figured. He did the same thing when my brother died. Slept by the door for 3 days. Didn't eat. Just waited." Harrison swallowed hard. "Do you think dogs know when it's time?" "I think good ones do," Eli said, kneeling beside them. But Cooper's not just any dog. There was a long silence as all 3 sat around him, hands resting gently on his fur, breathing with him, loving him wordlessly. Then, just as the sun peeked over the edge of the horizon, Cooper opened his eyes one last time. He looked at Harrison. Then Rebecca. Then Eli. His gaze lingered, not in pain, not in fear, but in peace. And then, without a sound, he let out one final breath. The room stilled. No tears came at first. Just silence. Deep, reverent silence. Harrison leaned forward, pressing his forehead against Cooper's. "Thank you," he whispered. "For finding your way back." Rebecca took his paw gently in her hands, her eyes brimming. Eli placed the old, worn collar in Harrison's lap, nodding once before stepping away. Outside, the city was waking up. Inside, the world had changed. But Cooper had finished what he came to do. The funeral was small. No announcement. No headline. Just a quiet gathering beneath an old oak tree in Harrison's backyard, the same yard where Cooper used to chase squirrels as a puppy. The morning sun filtered through the leaves like stained glass, dappling the soft grass below. They wrapped him in the blanket he had slept on the night before, the same one from the courthouse. Rebecca brought flowers. Eli carved a simple wooden marker that read, "Cooper, the dog who came home." No priest. No music. Just stories. "I used to talk to him like he understood everything," Harrison said, voice steady but soft. "Turns out, he probably did." Rebecca smiled through tears. "He came back to fix us. All of us." Eli, standing with hands in his pockets, nodded. "I don't think I'd be alive if he hadn't shown up that winter. I was in a place so dark. Cooper was the only light I had." They buried him gently, layering soil over years of memories, both old and new. Afterward, they sat on the porch in silence, sipping coffee, watching the sun climb. That night, Harrison returned to an empty house for the first time in decades. But it didn't feel so empty now. Something had shifted. He pulled out a box from the attic, old photos, toys, letters from childhood. At the very bottom was a hand-drawn picture he'd made at age 7, him and Cooper, sitting under a tree, a heart between them. He smiled. Grief didn't leave, but it softened. Over the following weeks, Harrison found himself walking more, talking more, feeling more. He called Rebecca daily. He met Eli for coffee once a week. They didn't always talk about Cooper, but somehow, everything they spoke about came back to him anyway. Cooper's return hadn't just reopened old memories. It had reopened their hearts. Months passed. Spring gave way to summer in Charleston, and the courthouse returned to its usual rhythm: cases, filings, busy mornings, and slow afternoons. But something in Judge Harrison McAllister had changed. He smiled more now. He listened longer. He even started keeping a jar of dog treats by his bench, something that made the bailiff raise an eyebrow, but never question. Then, one afternoon, a woman came into his courtroom with her son, a custody case. Tense. Fragile. Emotions high. The boy was quiet. Withdrawn. But when the woman broke down mid-testimony, the boy suddenly looked up from his seat and asked, "Do you have a dog?" Harrison paused. "I did," he said gently. His name was Cooper. The boy smiled. Just a little. That night, Harrison went home and opened a new file on his desk. At the top, he wrote, "The Cooper Foundation. A non-profit, small at first. Just an idea. A seed. Focused on therapy dogs for veterans, for kids in trauma, for families healing." It grew faster than he expected. Eli helped design the logo. Rebecca became the first board member. And over time, Cooper's name began appearing everywhere, in plaques, brochures, murals at children's hospitals. His story, once private, became something people shared in whispers and in tears. The dog who returned. The dog who healed. The dog who remembered. Years later, Harrison sat under that same oak tree in his backyard, now older, hair graying at the edges. He watched a golden retriever pup, full of energy, not a day over 6 months, race across the yard toward him. He smiled, bent down, and opened his arms. The puppy leapt into his lap. On his collar, a new tag shimmered in the sun. It read, "Cooper 2, born to come back." And in that moment, with wind in the trees and memories in his chest, Judge Harrison understood. Some goodbyes aren't endings. They're invitations to begin again.